artists around the world, teaching artists around the world, artists around the world.
Please welcome Jeremy Dell.
Okay,
get started. I start recording.
Artists around the world.
So I made an image in 1996. I had an idea for a brass band, which is basically a traditional British form of band. You have them in America in a way. You have marching bands. That these are bands that are usually associated with factories, literally, and coal mines to play acid house music, which of course is post-industrial electronic dance music. So in a way, it's almost a sort of joke juxtaposition, you could argue, of two forms of music. But really, it's about history and how music is entwined with history and social history. And so this diagram, I don't know how clear it is on your screen.
I can see it pretty good.
Good. Well, it explains the kind of genesis of acid house music, electronic music, but also how it relates to an industrial culture and industrial music of brass bands. So it's a kind of conceptual framework for the project. I mean, I could go through it, but it's sort of self-explanatory, really. And the two worlds meet really in the middle in terms of civil unrest and media hysteria, because both acid house and brass bands, which became associated with trade unions, became politicized forms of music, effectively. And in the 80s, they were both demonized in trade unions, but also acid house music because of the drug culture that went along with it. So they meet at this point, very British point, really, of media hysteria, but also civil unrest. And you have undercurrents underneath of deindustrialization, warehouse parties, and so on. But really what it's about is about bodies. It's about bodies going to picket fire stations and coal mines in the miners' strike, but also bodies going to acid house raves, illegal raves. And so this diagram holds up the idea. The idea itself, you could argue, is sort of a humorous, kitsch idea to have these two musical forms playing. And this is the band I work with. What it did, though, really, before I was doing this, usually I start talk showing images of an exhibition I made in my parents' house when they went on holiday in 1993, because it's sort of a funny way to start a talk. But I'm going straight into the meat, as it were, with this. And so this is the band I work with. As you can see, not very diverse, all male. At that point, they didn't have female members. They didn't want female members. And so unofficially, it was an all-male band, or officially. That's since changed. And this is them playing the acid house music. Usually they play to an old audience, elderly people. First time I went to see them play a concert, there was a woman in the front row knitting, literally, right in the front row. And they're young guys in the band. They're kind of students and stuff. So when we did the event, they start playing to young people. They play at festivals, dance music festivals, and so on. So what this taught me was a couple of things. Firstly, it liberated me from making objects and having to do printed work and little things with no money. It was like a really liberating experience, and it was not expensive to do either. It cost like £3,000 to have a whole brass band play this music and do a concert. So that was amazing. But also it taught me that the public, on the whole, in Britain at least, maybe it's different elsewhere in the world, but the public in Britain are really into doing things that are slightly different from what they might usually do, taking a risk. And if you can take the public along with you on these sort of little adventures, I call them, I wouldn't call it a journey because that is sort of used too much, I think. But it was an adventure because no one really knew how it would go as an event. And so it was an experiment or journey, an adventure or experiment. And it was a great one. And it just taught me that if you ring up someone and say, "Oh, I would like to do this with you," and you're more or less straightforward, then there's a very good chance someone's going to say yes. And the manager of the band said yes, and they still perform it. It's still played on radio. It's used all over the place. It was amazing. And I sort of
what year was that?
Really after 1997.
Oh my God! Because I remember, I think I told you I was a bartender in Wales in like '94. And everybody that I met, everyone's playing techno everywhere I went. And I'd be like, "What do you listen to?" And they go, "I listen to dance." What kind of music you like? Dance. It was like everywhere. It was just like, it like took over.
Well, this is the thing. The story of dance music in Britain is different from a lot of other countries in that it did really take over the whole country. It's a national story. It just wasn't in cities or metropolitan areas or kind of trendy areas or whatever, hipster areas. It was absolutely throughout, and it had no class barrier whatsoever. If anything, it was more of a working class movement than anything else. So it's a very important moment in British history, I would argue. So this was really, that diagram and working with the band was like a huge thing for me. I'm going backwards. Let's go forwards. So I don't know if you've seen the film I made, Nato, but I'm going to show the little clip.
I love it. I think this is the part I love the most.
Yeah. So this is a still from a piece of archive, and I was asked to make a film in 2018 about London and dance music, and I just thought, there's no way I'm going to make a film about dance music in London in the 80s, because I need to make it about Britain, because it wasn't about London. If anything, London was not really where it was at, frankly. And so I made it about the UK. It was sponsored. I mean, we can talk about this later about sponsorship. It was sponsored by Free. They've been given the money by Gucci to make 4 20-minute films. My film was over an hour long in the end because I just wasn't interested in making a 20-minute film. I wouldn't be able to show my face in Britain if I'd made a 20-minute film about acid house music.
It's a trap.
Yeah, exactly. So I made a 1-hour film, and I made a film about this movement. This moment between sort of 80, musically between 87 and 92. And I made it through the eyes of a group of young people. So the film, it's a story of that moment. In a way, the film is actually, let's go back. It's actually this diagram. What I realized once I was making the film, I realized I was making this drawing I made in 1996 into 22 years later. It's basically the script for a film. So this is my script, more or less. I'd say 80% of the things in this, the words in this, are actually used in the film, maybe 75%. But it's all covered. More or less everything here is covered in the film. And it was a film about history and music and their connectivity, really, or how they become, you can't separate one from the other. Or how popular culture can't be really separated from social history and politics, effectively. So what I'll do is, the next thing I'll do is show you the trailer for the film.
It's great.
And what I didn't want to do was make a film. A lot of these events, a lot of films about this moment in history are really quite nostalgic and people reminiscing. And often it's a group of men sitting in front of mixing desks or their collection of synthesizers talking about them.
When I got my first 808.
Exactly. It's all of that. And having said that, I did something similar in a way. I went into the classroom and I spoke to those young people. They're politics students in a school in London. And I did the class about this moment in history, but also about British history just before, during and after. Mainly before, what was going on, what were the circumstances and the context and the atmosphere in the country that led to this thing or helped this thing become so important and so important in people's lives. So that's what I did. The film is called Everybody in the Place, which is obviously a song by The Prodigy, if you know all of that. I'm going to leave screen share now. I'm going to do something very dangerous and leave screen share and see what happens. I'm not quite sure how I do that even. I think I press escape, but I hope that's it.
Let's do it.
Have I left screen share? Yes, I have. Okay. Stop screen sharing.
Yeah.
Bear with me. Present media.
You're killing it. You're killing it.
Oh, what happened there? What happened there?
It's all right.
I want my files. There we go. So what I was trying to do with this trailer was basically make something very exciting. I'll try and make it full screen. Let's see if I can do that. I'll try to it's a song that is an amazing techno song, and it just builds.
It looks great, Jeremy. It's full screen here. It's okay.
Is it? Okay. I'm just going to play it. I hope it does it well. Turn it up.
We can hear it. Yeah. Let's see people ready for a party. They're all going to a dance party. DJ music. You like it? Yo, dude, that's dope.
Okay. So yeah, it's very exciting, isn't it? So,
Jeremy, there's that scene in your film, though, I love, where it's like comparing that dance TV show from like one year to the next, where rave just took over, and how the dance styles just changed. Like,
yeah, and it's, I mean, that's a TV show, but everyone knows it. I think every country has some sort of dance club TV show in a way, and this was a guy that used to go into nightclubs in the 80s and sell his records there and sort of introduce artists and songs, and it just shows what the nightclub situation was like for most people in Britain. It was pretty dire. You basically have to dress as if you were going to a wedding or to work, even worse, and wear your work clothes to get into a club, and then, you know, have the danger of being beaten up by a bouncer or some other guy who's really angry that he's wearing his work clothes. That, you know, it's that sort of situation, and that's what it was like. It really was like that. So I think, and then that changed very quickly. And so it's a film about that change, but also about the politics, you know, and in a way that the trailer really has most of the elements in, really, about what the film is about. And what for me was interesting, it was because the film was seen through the eyes of the young people who were in the classroom. I'm in the film a lot, so it absolutely pains me to death to watch it, because I hate seeing myself and hearing myself. So that's the worst part about it. But so there is a middle-aged white guy in the film, you know. Having said that about all these past films, and to me, but it's more of a traditional setting of the classroom. So I'm trying to not be nostalgic or anything. I'm just trying to give the facts as I see them, or how it was for me, how it felt. But basically, you're seeing this moment not through my eyes, really, but through the young people's eyes, because they're in the film a lot and they respond to the footage. They talk about things, they talk about their lives, about racism, about their view of the countryside, and so on. So that was my that's a film I made 2 years ago. But in a way, it's a culmination of all that thinking that I'd done. In a way, that film was in me in 1996, but I just didn't have the opportunity to make it because I'd already made the script. You know, that
But I think, just to go to it, because I want to also, I think it's a picture behind you, is that Kraftwerk picture that's actually features prominently in the film as well. But but something that I think you accomplished, you know, my life was changed by a book called Lipstick Traces by Greil Marcus. And he took three things and put them into conversation with each other. He took punk rock, and he took the avant-garde, and then he took political meaning. And I was used to punk and music being something that I loved, but I didn't understand its politics. And art didn't seem to have any relationship to any of it. But I cared a lot about activism too, but I didn't ever think of these three spheres as ever having anything to do. And I think in your work, you're able to bring these things into a conversation. For a lot of those young kids, I'm sure their music styles, they don't think of as political at all. But you unpack it.
Well, I mean, they didn't see that music as political. I had to explain to them why it was. They said, you know, most of house music on the whole has no lyrics or has very repetitive lyrics. So it's not like a Bob Dylan style of lyrics, and rock, the way rock music has lyrics that have a meaning or a story. So it's not that the politics was elsewhere, really. It was just the fact that thousands of people were traveling through country lanes at night to gather in the same place at the same time, evading the police, to be together in a place where they shouldn't have been. It was a political act. It wasn't necessarily political music, but it was the behaviour that it was encouraging was political, but not in a party political sense. So that's why the authorities found it very difficult to deal with it. They couldn't work out what was going on, basically. And then, of course, the drug element was massive as well. So that was another element of illegality, but kind of hedonism was something that was unexpected.
Did you want to, I'm wondering if you wanted to go to Battle of Orgreave, which I also know Minor Strike is in your map of acid brass. And I don't know when you put it in there, it ever occurred to you that you'd have such a massive project already in that map.
Well, weirdly, I'd been thinking about this for most of my life. It's weird with Acid House and with this is the Minor Strike. As soon as they were happening, I knew that it was important. I mean, clearly the Minor Strike was important, but I knew that this was something that maybe I would revisit in my life again, or I'd need to find more out about, or I needed to know more about. And so as an artist, you're in a very lucky position. You can research things, disparate things that interest you and make other people interested in them if you're lucky. So yes, in a way, that diagram from 1996 holds the seeds for many works and continues to, weirdly. Not that all my work is about the past, but a lot of it is about recent, very, very recent history or recent events that I try and look at in maybe a different way. This is an image from the Minor Strike. This is an image from Orgreave, which is a huge confrontation, a legendary, notorious, I should say, confrontation between police and striking miners. Very violent, but also a public act. It was filmed by the police and also by the British media. They were given sort of very good spots by the police, basically, to film from, because the police basically stage managed a battle and publicly humiliated the miners. They had huge numbers, but also police and mounted police and also dogs and so on. So it had a feel of a kind of medieval battle, basically, when I saw it on TV as a child. And I was obsessed with it. And a lot of people referred to me, people would talk about it, refer to it, even though we might not have known what it was called. They would talk about the horses. It's quite interesting. The people that talk about it even now, or 5 years after, I think people were kind of slightly traumatized by what was going on. So the mid-'80s, remember, 1984 in the UK, we had 5 years of Margaret Thatcher's government. She just got in the previous year, so she had another mandate for another 5 years. So she was in her full power, the state power, to bring against the trade unions. And so I had this insane idea. It was just the craziest idea to restage the riot or battle. It wasn't really a riot, because a riot would suggest there was some sort of equality between the sides. But to restage the battle, also the number of people involved, and for local people, really, working with people who'd been part of it originally, but also members of reenactment societies. Now, you've seen the film, is that correct? You watched the film?
Not everybody, but my class has. So you have to kind of explain a little bit for everyone else.
So, I mean, the film is documentation. The artwork is 1,000-person restaging of a riot, basically.
What year was it? 84?
2001. Well, no, 84 was the original.
The original, right.
My restaging, my reenactment was 2001. So this is 2001. And the next photograph is 2001. That's one. This is my favorite photograph at the time. We employed a photographer to take photographs, this young woman. And I think she was so nervous during it, but most of the photographs she took have camera shake.
Wow.
She took the black and white one as well. And I actually prefer these to the one I showed you before, which was taken by a press photographer. I prefer these, because these really have the kind of dynamic quality to them, and sort of a chaotic, unstaged quality to them. So really what I was doing was I was going back to the site of a crime as I saw it and restaging the crime for almost to bear witness to something. and also to see what the limits of performance are. Because I would always explain to people that I was an artist, so that was always up front. I wasn't trying to say, I'm making a documentary about this. I mean, we did say that to certain people, usually the police and the local government, because they weren't very happy.
Because you didn't feel like getting into a long conversation about it.
No, they wanted to forget this. The police came out very, very badly over the strike, and people were very angry with the police for years, probably still are, because of the way the police behaved. And so the police were told that it was a public performance, but also it's being filmed for a documentary, which it was. So depending on who you're talking to, you'd say what you were doing. But I always introduced myself as an artist, but no one ever asked me about the art element of it, ever. And I met hundreds of people in total. No one was interested in the fact that I was an artist. You make the odd, like, what kind of paintings do you make? But that was about it. But that's fine, because I think, to be honest, the former miners and their families who made up a lot of the reenactments, people, they kind of understood instinctively, on the whole, why it was happening and why it was a good idea or an interesting idea, at least, for it to happen. So it was a public event. Quite a lot of people witnessed it or saw it, like 1,000 or so. You can't really see them in this because this is the second half of the reenactment went through a village. It was a much more exciting thing to watch because it was more chaotic. And to be perfectly honest with you, it wasn't a particularly accurate reenactment of the battle for a number of reasons. One of which is you can't really reenact chaos particularly easily. But it was just make a point about what can be done and what should happen. And
Jeremy, this was
it's all about.
In terms of this, this was with BBC4. Who was Channel 4? Because in terms of China for an Art Angel. Okay, so it was a collaboration. So for those that don't know, Art Angel is kind of like it's a public arts organization that's done really great work in London. I worked at Creative Time. Creative Time and Art Angel have a similar kind of experimental stuff in public space. But I want to ask you too, Jeremy. There was a pretty renowned film director named Mike Figgis that actually shot the documentation of this. The scale of this project is quite enormous. And for an artist, it must have been like a million times bigger than anything you've taken on before.
Well, the budget was huge for that time. It was £500,000 in 2001, which is a lot of money for TV, even for an hour of television. That's a huge amount of money. So that was something. And yes, I mean, you become part of what is effectively a film shoot because that's what was happening. And the money came from TV. So it became basically like a large film shoot. And to be honest, I could have died 2 weeks before this happened and it would have been more or less the same. On the day, I was wandering around just thinking, what have I done? This is a disaster. I'm going to have to leave the country. I literally left the country afterwards. 2 months later, I was in California because I just thought, I've got to get out of Britain. No one's going to talk to me after this. I mean, it was well received, but I still thought it was, in a sense, it's like, you should never do this. Yeah. A lot of the work I do, and including what I did with you, Nato, in 2009, especially what I did with you, is kind of irresponsible and potentially dangerous and risky, as is this. Yeah. A lot of the people who took part are members of reenactment societies, people like that. And they are very traditional, conservative men. I don't know if you're aware of this, if you know anyone that's joined these societies. Weirdly, I think this is a photograph taken in America of a Civil War one or some Revolutionary War.
That looks like a Revolutionary War.
Yeah, it's not Civil War. That's totally wrong. It's much earlier. And so these men, overwhelmingly, really right wing. I mean, that's the closest you're going to get to a gun in Britain is being a reenactor, effectively, and firing one and running around. I mean, they don't have bullets in them. But, there is this kind of weird fringe reenactment world that is quite dodgy. And so you have these men who are on the whole very right wing coming up against rehearsing a day before and then doing a reenactment with men who are traditionally quite left wing because they're socialists, they were miners, part of a union. And so the meeting of these two worlds was quite interesting and was caught in the film. But also there's a massive amount of distrust between the reenactors especially. They really distrusted the miners. They thought the miners were going to start a real riot, real revolution, effectively. which didn't happen, but there's a huge amount of emotion by the miners, the former miners in the reenactment.
Yeah.
A massive amount of emotion. Can I see on these guys' faces? Not all these people are miners or former miners. Some are reenactors. We had to mix them up a bit. But I think the reenactors have never experienced a proper emotional charge from reenacting a battle, because usually they reenact battles from history when no one's alive that can even remember it, let alone have fought in it. But this is absolutely on the soil with the men who were part of it.
Hey, Jeremy, I want to ask you a question from Chris, who says, hey, what was the immediate aftermath of this like? And then how did it wind down? How did these guys get to assume, how did they go back into their modern day thing? Like, was a decompression? And I also would say, because you know how I am, I keep you on everything on time. We're going to shift fast to It Is What It Is, because I want to do It Is What It Is. And I also want to do your Brexit film. And we got a half hour, so I want to kind of touch on those two things.
Right.
But that's Chris's question.
I'll answer those questions.
Yeah.
We didn't do any kind of aftercare.
Yeah.
The aftercare really was a big queue after this to be paid. So all the men just stood in a queue together and were paid in cash for their 2 days' work. And in a way, that was a great decompression moment, because they were all standing around joking and talking about it and what it was like for them. The reenactors sent a lot of letters afterwards to the head reenactment saying they'd never experienced anything like it in their lives, and they were really, really happy with it, because I think they thought they'd made some kind of history in a way. So it sort of, I'm not going to sort of blow my own trumpet, but I think it went well, and so people afterwards felt okay about it. You could do a study maybe of how it was for people a year later and how they feel about it. We did a screening of the film. It was premiered in the town nearest where this happened. All the miners turned up with their families, and it was an amazing evening, and it was great. So I think it was fine. I think because people were treated well and they were paid as well, they felt that they'd been respected.
Well, I could imagine a reenactment of Black Lives Matter march this summer in Philly while everyone's got COVID and the youngins are out in the streets saving the world. We've had these moments that don't seem to look up, like be heralded as great historical moments. They're generally wars. And you took a different kind of narrative and brought a kind of affirmation and presentation to it and budget. Yeah,
but remember, we're going to just skirt over this.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. I just remember when I saw it as a child, and I was more or less a child when I saw it. I was 18, but I was effectively a child, believe me. I was very affected by it.
Yeah.
So it was something to do. Okay, I have a little bit of footage of this as well. This is something I did in 2009 with NATO, but this is the genesis of it. This is a failed project. I wanted to put on the fourth plinth of Trafalgar Square a vehicle that had been destroyed in Iraq during the confrontation, during the invasion and the subsequent sort of civil uprising. That's a Photoshop image of what it could have looked like, the car on the plinth for a year. The plinth is used for contemporary art. Artwork goes up, and I was shortlisted for this to happen. And this is what I suggested.
So good.
And it didn't win.
It's so good.
But it's not surprising, really. Yeah. But I knew that it'd be amazing in the centre of London, in this very colonial environment, this square, Trafalgar Square. It's named after a battle that Britain won, a sea battle, to have a spoil of war that would basically have disintegrated over a period of time and just rotted and looked like a heap of shit, basically. I just thought that was an appropriate thing to do in 2006, I think it was. It didn't happen, but I really held on to the idea. And I got a chance to do some exhibitions in the US in 2009, and I knew exactly I wanted to make a museum of the war in Iraq. Yeah. And the centerpiece would have been a car destroyed in Baghdad or elsewhere in Iraq. And then I just thought, well, if this exhibition is touring, it should tour publicly, and the car should be towed around America as a kind of act, in a way, a piece of performance, some sort of very dangerous piece of performance art. So I approached NATO, I've known for a long time, and said, do you want to do this? And he said, yes. I just thought, you're mad. This is just going to be so difficult. Yeah. And but we did it.
Yeah.
So this car, as you can see, with this on the side, I don't know if you can read it. It says this car was destroyed by a bomb in a Baghdad marketplace, March 5th, 2007. and we just rocked up basically in towns and cities.
It's crazy how flat that car is, isn't it?
How flat? Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost two-dimensional.
I think it's flat for a couple of reasons. When a bomb goes off, it sort of flattens the air pressure as such. But also, I think it was kept in a big car pound, from what I heard later, where they keep all the cars destroyed in bomb attacks, and it probably had a car on top of it. So they were just being compacted by other vehicles.
Debbie's totally great. Debbie writes, that is 29 Palms where the Marines train. Oh, do we know?
Exactly, yes. Yes, that's towards the end of our trip. That's the only time we really got what I would call a photo op. Most of the time, as you'll see, it's kind of chaotic. It wasn't the best.
It was almost undocumentable.
It was. I had a camera that had a kind of mark on it. So every photograph has a little black sort of smudge on it. We made videos, but the quality now, you make a better video on a phone now. It's amazing how low quality it is. And I'm going to show a video in a minute. So this is Arizona. You can see the black smudge on the signage. Yep. And that's Esam, the guy sitting down. And we would just hang out and we'd give out flyers saying what we were doing. And it was very low key. It wasn't political in a kind of party political, impeach Bush, jail Bush, this, that, and the other. It was very, very low key. Obama had just been made president. And I suspect the country was quite calm because of that. It's before people got angry.
Oh, and you should introduce who Esam and Jonathan were too.
Yeah. So Esam, is that working? Does that go big?
Yeah, you got
Zooming in.
Yeah.
That's Esam. He was a translator for the Marines, I think, or the Airborne, Florida Airborne. And he put his life at risk many times as a translator. He wanted to translate for the American Army because he saw them as they arrived and invaded. He saw them screaming at people in English and no one knew what they were saying. And he realized that people were going to get killed because they didn't know what stop meant, or go, or come here, or don't go, So he volunteered for help, and as a result, he had to leave the country. Very, very educated man, very clever, very funny. He could handle himself in any situation with anyone thinking that he was the enemy when they would come and chat with him. So he had some amazing conversations with people. Very funny guy, very witty, huge as well. He was a judo champion.
Massive.
For a time. Yeah.
We watched him eat 3 cheeseburgers and 2 shakes. He ate so much food on that trip.
So much food. But yeah, I remember the first day we did this, we pulled out, we were driving through New Jersey with this toad in open view with the signs. And I remember thinking, I was looking at Esam and Jonathan Harvey, who is the soldier, who'd both been literally in life-threatening situations, and they looked really worried. And I just thought, well, if they're worried, I should be really, really worried because, this is... I wish I just didn't think, well, maybe we don't need to go on this. I can just stay in London and just see how it goes. I was just such a coward. But it was an amazing trip. It was like the best thing I've ever done, I think, as an artist. It was like the most fun, but also the most work.
Yeah.
Sort of stressful and fun at the same time. It's difficult to describe, really. But we had, a lot of people saw it by car. That was interesting. It's just someone passing it by in the desert. And now it's in the Imperial War Museum in London. It's on permanent display there. So that's where its home is. So it was an incredible thing, really. I mean, weirdly, we were very worried about our well-being, but the people that really were angry with us were the anti-war, people who were anti-war, who'd suffered a lot under George Bush after the invasion in a way. And yet we come along and we don't really satisfy what they expect from us, really. Their expectations were for like a big whistles and bells anti-war event, and it wasn't. It was very, very quiet, wasn't it, Nato?
Very.
Probably because we were going to Texas and Alabama and Tennessee.
But also, just Jeremy, another thing that I thought was so remarkable was we got used to someone circling us for a while, and you slowly realize it was like a 20-year-old kid who was already a war vet. And they would kind of sniff us out to see what our politics were. Once they realized it was just a place they could talk, then they just sit there all day and talk and talk and talk. And that became more familiar over time.
Yeah, we had a lot of art students, I remember, or a number of art students. Actually, we have the book here, and there's some stuff in here. Art students, Iraqi refugees. This guy was St. Louis, I think.
Yeah.
He showed us his notebook that he made when he was working on a submarine, loading Tomahawk missiles into the silos or whatever it is, the chutes where they're being launched to destroy army barracks and buildings and so on. And he was totally traumatized by what he'd done.
He really was.
He'd enlisted thinking he'd actually have to go to war. So his work was very dark, wasn't it?
So
it was
intense.
Very disturbing.
Yeah.
And he was an interesting guy. So we met a lot of people on the road, just bumped into them.
Including my wife.
People have been in. Exactly. That's where you met your wife. Most importantly. So.
And we met that woman that worked for, was it the Kellogg Brown and Root or the?
Yes. Well, she's in that image.
Yeah.
I'll just show you. She is. So there's a young woman we met who. This lady here, I don't know if you can see that. I've kind of zeroed in on her wearing. She works in the green zone doing sort of entertainment for the troops, which included like sort of baseball stars turning up and cheerleaders and whatnot. And she had to leave because it was too much for her, and she was out within 24 hours of just saying, I can't handle this anymore. Like manicures and pedicures for the guys. And she alleged that there was a big prostitution scene happening in the green zone with the women workers who'd come to do the cleaning and cooking and so on from the Philippines and so on. So it was quite heavy, conversations like that were quite heavy. And that's the only time I think we saw the soldier lose his temper because he denied it massively. So, yeah, you never really knew who you were talking to when you met people. And I think that was what was interesting. You go up to a stranger, give them a flyer, and they could have had, their son could have been killed 3 weeks previously. No idea who these people were, what their affiliations were. So yeah, that's why we were very bland. I think the word is bland. It's not a word I'd want to use much for my artwork, but we were super bland, I think, for good reason, in the way we presented it.
Also, it showed you the complexity of America because we met an African-American Vietnam vet who was pro-war. We met that indigenous Native American guy outside of Santa Fe who was for the war. Do you remember that?
Yeah. We filmed them. We made some film. I was going to show that clip of the guy from Memphis, if that's all right.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, please.
And then we can go on to the other thing. So this is what we did when we were on the road. We made these little films. The sound is not so good, so you just have to concentrate. We made films with people we bumped into. And this is the one we made in Memphis.
Which is a great city.
It was a great city. We had a really good time there. And I wouldn't say this is typical of the kind of people we met. This is what the setup looked like. As you can see, it's pretty low key. You had your tent there.
Yeah.
But it's just this guy speaks for himself.
Yeah. Anytime the country goes through hard times, Great Depression, World War II, or anything else, it's the culture that brings people together. It's all about history. Stax Music, Isaac Hayes, Otis Redding, Booker T and the MGs, Sun Records, all of it. It all started here. All of it started here. Memphis gets...
Hey, Jeremy, turn yours down.
Yeah.
I think we're getting...
Turn mine off?
Yeah, turn yours off and just let it play.
Is that better?
Yeah. I'll turn mine off too.
It brings people together. It's all about history. Stax Music, Isaac Hayes, Otis Redding, Booker T and the MGs, Sun Records, all of it. It all started here. All of it started here. Memphis gets a bad rap, but people in Memphis work harder to get along because of the adversity that they've been through. And that if people in other places could see how hard people in Memphis work to get along and to right the wrongs of the past, it wouldn't have such a bad reputation. I love Memphis. Memphis is a great place. And when I moved down here last year, I decided that's the last time I'm moving. I'm never going back to Nashville. I'm staying right here in Memphis. And, this is it. Because I'm old now. I'm getting close to retirement.
Did you feel isolated when you were, because of your political views early on?
God, yes. My daughter that I told y'all about, that chewed the cop out, at the time that happened, she was ill. And a few months later, she died.
Sorry.
And the same lady that called the cops on her, I was standing outside the day before the funeral, and we were planning some funeral arrangements. And this lady had the nerve to walk up to me and tell me that the reason that my daughter died was that God was punishing us for not supporting George W. Bush. And I mean, that did something to me. I mean, it just kind of turned me against any type of religion. And, you know, as far as just be bipartisan and forgive and forget, no. You can't forgive and forget. Like that car over there that got blown all to pieces, you know, the people live over there. How many of their loved ones died in that blast? Should they forgive and forget? You know, they didn't come over here and start a war on us. We came over there and started a war on them. Why shouldn't they hate us forever? If someone did that to my neighborhood, I guarantee you I'd hate them forever. But Americans have a sense of entitlement, that everything's owed to us. Why? Yeah. Why should we have everything?
Oh my God, dude, it's such a deep cut.
Yeah. So I suppose what we liked about him was he was talking about everything, wasn't he? He was talking about the culture of the town, religion, his family, the war, America, everything in like 2.5 minutes. It's quite a tragic story in a way as well.
Oh, it's so heavy.
But, yeah.
Hey,
really.
I know it's actually, I want to transition to your film about Brexit because also we just, as you probably heard, we had an election.
Yeah.
Did you catch that?
Someone's just buzzed on my door. I think they're delivering something to me.
All right.
Well, if I go in deep,
no, it's fine. I like this.
Just talk about yourself.
All right. We'll talk about it. But just for the record, so I obviously went on that trip, and Jeremy, that project, what I thought was so beautiful about it is two things. One, you know, what I always liked working with these public art projects like this one was no one knew it was an art project, and it didn't matter. But the one thing that was so also really powerful was that how rare it is in anywhere, particularly America, to have a place where you could just have a conversation without having anyone judge you. Like, I know they talk about safe spaces, but this was literally like, just talk to these guys that were just over there in Iraq, who just seen the war up close, and get information from them, talk to them, have an open conversation without any agenda. It's that kind of thing that made a lot of our left-wing friends go crazy because they were like, this is, you know, you can't be ambivalent about it. But the space to have a non-judgmental, open-ended conversation was really needed. And in fact, you know, I think about the American landscape today, it's all the more needed. And they didn't know it was art, but people could tell it was a very rare thing to do. So I think that was something very magical. And the other thing too is like, you really had to kind of get in quiet and close because people, when they have these conversations, were really cognizant that other people might be listening. So they would kind of whisper these conversations. They weren't telling them loud. It was probably the quietest project I ever worked on, with the loudest sculptural object in the world.
So, stop presenting.
What did you have delivered?
They left it downstairs, so I wasn't going to go downstairs and bring it up because I live on the top of an apartment block. But I think it's plates and cups with Stonehenge printed on them. I made.
Oh, cheers. Well,
but
cheers.
I'm leaving them downstairs. See what happens. Stop presenting. I'm not doing that. I'm just trying to work out where I go from here.
I think we're going to go to your Brexit movie or something. Do you know where? Do you have images or something you can do with that?
I'm going to press a button and I'm going to disappear.
All right.
From the whole screen. Stop presenting. Oh, no, yes, stop presenting. Yes. Do you want to? I'm going to show a few photographs from that project.
Please.
I'm going to do that first because that has some interesting things in it. Yeah. So basically, last year I was hanging around the Parliament Square, just talking to people on the right and far right about Britain and about Brexit, because people were out on the streets demonstrating because they wanted Brexit to happen more quickly than it was happening, and there was a lot of political turmoil. And I couldn't believe what I was witnessing on British land. Basically, I couldn't never. Oh, someone's here. Sorry.
This guy. What's he doing? Someone's here. Well, let me tell you about this. I think it's really important because with Jeremy does these kind of pop culture ethnographic documentary style projects. And, he takes these curious personalities or these things that almost feel cursory to political life. Oh, I can get into that. I'll get into that, Clark. But real quick. And then but he also, I honestly think from this culture, I quite literally, politically, socially believe you can understand American politics. Look at what is he doing? It's like, this is the best. But you can understand I was going to say two things I want to ask Jeremy. And we'll go a little over time for two questions. Yeah. But one, I was like, I actually think you can understand American political life better if you think of it culturally.
Yeah.
Than if you try to think of it like ideology. Everyone's like, there's an ideological divide. And I was like, I just feel like that word ideology implies a certain kind of idea.
The people have a big set of ideas.
Which I just feel like is totally inaccurate.
Or they've read a lot and thought about their ideology and will be with these people and those people. Yeah. Ideology does suggest a level of education that might not be available to a lot of people as well, potentially. But here it was a culture war. Basically the culture wars of America have been imported into Britain by the same people that have done it in America. Cambridge Analytica, Facebook, all these people, all these players. The Russians were definitely involved. That's why I call it Putin's happy. And it was just this moment when the country was ripping itself apart, a bit like the miners' strike, but kind of worse in a way because it's been going on for so long. And the results of it will be seen very soon when we do leave the EU. This is a great moment. There's a Marxist there who didn't think it was good or bad, but had this very fantastic Marxist view about it. That's what he would have put on the referendum ballot, or that's what he put on the referendum ballot. And he's actually quite funny, but also quite smug about the whole thing, saying, well, this is what you get when you have an economic collapse. You have the far right in ascendance, which we all know about. So that was quite funny. And then there are moments like this in the film. It's a documentary. It's a very scrappy documentary, as you're going to see a clip in a minute, where I film people and things, and I do a still image, basically. I stop the film. I try and decode what's going on. This is a very, very extreme example of a guy covered in tattoos, all to do with numerology and the Bible, conspiracy theories.
I'm sure there's a QAnon guy in America right now with those tattoos all over him.
Absolutely. QAnon were at this. And this was last year before people really really understood who QAnon were. Well, I knew who they were, but the majority of the population had no idea, I suspect. It was like these two hipsters, basically. They looked like people that had their own organic farm somewhere, young people, and they had the Q signs. Very strange, not what you'd expect. So this guy's an old football fan, and he is obsessed with the Crusades, amongst other things. And this is just some of his tattoos. I didn't speak to him. I was too scared to speak to him for obvious reasons. But I did film him.
Obvious reasons.
He has all these sort of, he had 2 dates on this arm, both of which the main news story of that day were massacres by the army of civilians. And so I suspect that's why those dates were there. It could have been the birth dates of his children or something, but it just so happened one was the Haditha massacre, which I'm sure will remember from 2005. Also, can you see 88 on his arm? That's Heil Hitler.
Wow.
That's HH, Heil Hitler. So, he wasn't really hiding his allegiances, really. So the film, like I said, is very scrappy. It's not particularly technically brilliant in a way that maybe you could have made a film like that. It's really looking more at the far right and the right, like I said, but there are moments where young people who are not of that persuasion speak because I just bumped into them, basically. There's a fantastic group of young people who've just been racially abused, but were very excited by the kind of atmosphere, were pro-Europe, anti-Brexit, and they just thought it was great, the whole kind of carnivalesque atmosphere outside the House of Parliament. But it was a lot darker than that a lot of the time. But I really wanted to talk to people and just understand why they were so unhappy with Britain and so unconfident and down on the country, even though they were very patriotic. It's quite a weird combination. People who see themselves as patriotic, like I'm sure in America, are the people that really think America's terrible and it's got terrible and it used to be better. but they're not. They're very unhopeful and very pessimistic about the country. Whereas people on the left, or young people, are usually much more optimistic, weirdly, even though they've got this huge challenges to do with. Like these young people, they have racism and anti-Islamic feelings, which are kind of very high in these circles to deal with, and a very uncertain future, even more so now. So it was interesting, but the documentary is a total mess, basically, because the situation was a total mess. But I will show one clip. It's only about 2 minutes long.
Yep.
And it really shows what the atmosphere was like, more or less. Not surprisingly, because it's London, it's of a very rainy day, and a very kind of unpleasant interaction I had with, well, my cameraman and I had with someone. And I'll just play it. It's subtitled because you might find the sound a bit difficult. I was just worried because if you're not all native English speakers, you might find it a bit difficult to hear. But anyway, here we go.
I can actually request you not to. I can request you not to film. It's not illegal, but then if I give the request, I don't want to be filmed. Why do you not? No, you yeah, but you don't need to. Who are you? Are you all? You don't need to know who I am. We'll find out.
Ashamed to be here, basically. He's ashamed to be here. That's why he doesn't want to be filmed.
I'm not ashamed to be here. I'm just watching the destruction of the EU before my very eyes. And it is so beautiful to watch a fascist, federalist, Soros-run Rothschild project destroyed. Freedom to British people. And traitors like you who betrayed my children, my grandchildren.
You can stick your Brexit on.
Who are you? Jared, that's a Jewish name.
Yes.
Yeah, who are you? Yeah, but who are you?
Who am I?
Yeah. Yeah, well, what are you reporting me?
I'm not reporting.
I'll have you for harassment. Yeah, don't follow me around, okay?
It's like I'm not knowing you.
You won't know. It's for you, me to know and you to find out.
You just stay on him. He just stays on him.
It's not Jared again.
Why were you interested in whether I was Jewish or not?
I genuinely have to know. Because sometimes, my friends, you have to be careful.
Yo, dude. I've not even seen this, Jeremy. That's so intense.
Yeah. I unfortunately made a little clip at the end. There are things you don't know and things you won't know. And he says something else a bit cryptic after it. It's like, I know the truth. I know the big secret of the world. And you've got to find that out but I know it, but I'm not going to tell you, basically. Classic kind of conspiracy theorist sort of view of the world. But he was some kind of right-wing think tank guy, I suspect, because he was smartly dressed. There's a class aspect to this. A lot of the demonstrators were working class or lower middle class. This guy is not of that stock, I would say. He's more like the kind of people I went to school with, and there's a kind of upper middle class, and they really respected him because he talked in a certain way and he knew stuff. He wore a suit.
And he knows about the Rothschild Soros conspiracy.
he knows what's really happening in the world. And so he was going around chatting to all the kind of conspiracy theorists who were definitely, they would look up to him and chatting to him, and they thought he was great. But we never found out who he was.
So Jeremy, we're almost time for questions, but I want to ask you something in regards to this film, because certainly we just had our election. And I think that, just personally, I feel like I feel like people always personalize these things in the wrong way. In the sense that they're like, how could someone vote for Trump? But I don't think they understand that, like, they're not voting for Trump, they're voting against a different world. And I wanted to know from your perspective, what did you find, what did you glean about the shifting nature of what constitutes the public? Or where are these political opinions deriving from? What's getting mashed up? What did you discover?
Well, I think a lot of people have rightful grievances, basically, as they probably do in America, about their health, even though we have healthcare for everyone, which is free at the point of service, basically. People still feel they're not getting the treatment they deserve, or they've been ill for a long time and they have mental health problems. I'm not saying they're meant, like long-term depression and so on. So there's illness, people are ill. Also, there's housing. There's a problem of housing because of what's happened in the last 20, 30 years. Social housing has been cut and it's very expensive to rent and buy. So families have been fragmented and people can't live where they grew up and they have to move out. And people lose contact with their families and friends. So there's that as well. People spoke a lot about communities being sort of broken up because of housing and so on. But then, which is fine because it's true, but of course they go then and blame immigrants for this and Muslims. When they say immigrants, they more or less mean Muslims. So the anger is real and true, and I can understand that, the frustration, but it just goes in a direction that it should be going that way, it shouldn't be going that way. But because of the way the press has worked for a long time, and politicians with the press, especially, I know it's this cliche to say, especially the Murdoch press, they've been blaming Europe and immigration and immigrants for the last 35 years.
Well, blaming people is good news.
It's easy, isn't it? It's a distraction. It's really easy, and especially those people who look different from you, you can identify them really quickly and easily. It's more difficult blaming Polish people coming from Europe taking jobs because they just look like us, more or less. But if they've got beards and they dress slightly differently and they have an accent, they're much more easy to identify, and then they can be separated from the rest of the population. And so the darker you are, the more of a victim or you potentially might be, or target.
So listen, Jeremy, you're a co-host, right? What I'm going to do is I'm going to take some questions. I'm going to stop co-hosting you, and I'm going to take a question. They're going to ask a question with their pretty face, and then I will then have you respond. Does that sound good to everybody? Does anybody have a question? You can raise your hand. By the way, thank you, Jeremy, for this. I really appreciate it. Is it? Oh, wait, hold on. Vahab, can I have you? I'm going to have you. Hold on, I'm going to get you out, Jeremy, a sec. Raise hands. Vahab, you had a question. I'm going to get you. 1 second. Co-host you.
Hi.
Hold on. Can't see you yet, Vahab. I like to see. Sorry. There you go, bud.
Yeah. Hi. Thank you for the presentation, Jeremy. The question is a very good observation, very direct in terms of the comparison between Polish and, say, Muslim groups in Britain. But I wonder if it's just a look, or is there something more deeply seated? Polish are Christian versus the others you can blame are Muslim.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Thanks. Yes, certainly the Crusades were a while ago. And I will now have my friend Jeremy respond. Here you go. Jeremy, I'm going to have you put your picture back on. There you go.
How about that?
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, well, it's obviously that. I mean, because there are Muslims in Britain who come from Serbia and Herzegovina who would look Western to us in terms of they would be just white European Muslims. They're never spoken of. It's basically people who don't look white Anglo-Saxon.
Yeah.
And of course, in addition to that, there's a religious aspect. But basically, the new racism is not really black people as it would have been 30, 40 years ago, or even people from Pakistan. It's people who basically it's a cultural thing. It's to do with the religion and what that religion, they see that religion bringing, and the people getting preferential treatment from Muslims, all this kind of stuff. I mean, it's proper conspiracy theory stuff. But like I said, Britain, we've been primed for this for years. So if you think about, British newspapers have been attacking refugees for 20, 30 years and Muslims for a similar amount of time. And so you only have to think about the internet beginning, everyone is ready, not everyone, but a lot of people are ready for something a little bit more extreme, what they read in the newspapers. And you get that very quickly and then you're lost, basically.
I got you.
Everybody said that with some Polish racism in our talks, in some interviews, but it's mainly to do with religious and cultural reasons, I'd say.
Hold on, we're going to go over to Shell. Shell, I got you from Texas. Come on, you can join us. Just put your mic on, your camera. There you go.
Okay. Hi. I'm enjoying this immensely. My question is about Brexit. When you approach people, how did you identify yourself, and did you sort of perform as a journalist asking questions, or how did you approach people to get them to talk to you and be on camera?
Cool. Thanks for that. Thanks, Shell. Gotta get faster at this. I'm good. Okay, here we go. Oh. Yep.
Hey, how's that?
Great.
So that's a really good question, because a lot of those people we interviewed would not have spoken to me if I'd have said I was from a news organization. They're super suspicious. They just didn't want to know. So some of those interviews I did in the film, not the one you saw then, were done with like a stills camera. So it was very unintimidating. But on the whole, it was just me and a cameraman, the guy who ran after that guy who's being anti-Semitic. And if they asked us what we were doing, because everyone wanted to know where you were from, I just told them the truth. I said, I'm an artist and I'm making a film about Brexit for a gallery in Austria, a museum in Austria, which was absolutely the truth. So luckily, my story was okay, because A, I'm an artist. Well, so what? Big deal. B, Austria. That's a country that has an amazing history of sort of right-wing parties and terrible history of it. So that probably, they thought, oh, Austria, that's good. We like Austria. We don't like Sweden. We like Austria. So I just told them the truth. But no one signed release forms, or very few people did, because as soon as you give someone a piece of paper with the right legal language, you just know they would not signed it and wouldn't want to have been in the film. And so it was done on the fly on the whole. But I didn't have to lie to anyone.
But I've loved, I have to say, Jeremy, I love that you just kind of dive in, because certainly the moment was happening. What else could you do? You got to get in there.
Yeah, and I told my cameraman when that situation, and that guy was like openly anti-Semitic and was being really angry and rude and horrible. I just said to my cameraman, Jared, who is Jewish, he's tiny, he's shorter than I am, and I'm really short. I just said, follow him. And that guy was big. He was like he's probably a foot taller than Jared.
Oh, and you felt that rage coming out when he started going, didn't you?
Yeah, but I felt it. But you know what? He didn't intimidate me.
No.
The other people that intimidated me there were these working class guys who were like skilled kind of from their days as football hooligans, who were really intimidating, and they scared the police even. Whereas that guy, he reminded me of the people I went to school with. And so it's like, I can see through you. You've said something really stupid. You probably don't believe it, but you know it sounds good for everyone else around you. You're educated, and yet you're spewing this rubbish. And I'm not scared of you. This is why I appear in the film briefly. You saw me.
Yeah.
And which I never would do, but I was so angry with him. I just thought, you idiot, why are you like this? And that's why I went up to him and just started, because I knew I was intimidating him by asking all those questions, because as soon as someone pushes your camera away and says, "Don't film me," it's like, all right, you're going to get filmed as much as possible.
Appreciate that. Let me move over to, we're going to move over to Clark because he's in Kuwait. This be interesting here. Hold on a second. All right, Clark, come on in, buddy. Hey, bud.
Yeah, I was just wondering how you acquired the car.
It's a great question. Great. And also, too, it's good with the Iraqi conversation that you're in Kuwait, because certainly you're not unfamiliar with some of the stories we're talking about in terms of people's experiences in the Gulf. Here, I'll bring it over to Jeremy.
Here? Yes. Well, the car was like, we were making inquiries in how to get a car from Iraq, and it was doable, but it was quite dangerous. And I spoke to some journalists who'd been out there, and they said, you shouldn't really go unless you really need to go. This is like around about 2007, 2008, when it was very dangerous. And they were saying, I think that's not to go because it's quite dangerous. And then someone heard, I don't know how he heard, this curator, Robert Kuvar, he got 2 cars out of Iraq. It took them a year to get 2 cars out of the country. And he had one that he didn't know what to do with. One of them he buried, I think. And he wrote to me saying, I hear you're trying to get a car out of Iraq. He said, I have one. Don't go there. It will take you too long and it'll be so expensive. He explained how he got one. It took him a year to get a car out, to work through the Red Cross. And so he gave us a car, and he used it for an exhibition in Amsterdam. And so we did it the easy way. And I'm kind of glad we did it the easy way, to be honest. Because I don't know if I'd be here sitting talking to you if I had to go out by myself to try and find a car that had been blown up, frankly, or been collateral damage in a bomb attack. So I'm in turn grateful to Robert for allowing us to have that.
Who's next? Somebody got a question out there? We got a good crew. Jeremy's in his peculiar little den of lots of objects on the wall. He's available for us. Come on, just raise your hand. Ben. Let's get you, Ben. Here we go. Hey, bud.
Hey, I was just wondering, kind of broad question, but if you could talk a bit about like the intersection of journalism, history, art, and then like kind of contemporary anthropology that seems to exist simultaneously in your practice.
Appreciate that. It is a quirky genre that he works in. And you also, to kind of build on what Ben says, Jeremy, you've also taken gigs in various worlds, because the film world does come out of different pockets. You got a Gucci-sponsored 30-minute film. You've worked with Channel 4. Oh, what? You know what I mean? You've worked with different people on your movies.
Well, I think as an artist, I'm not trained, art college trained. I don't have the traditional artistic, creative hand skills. So I have to get wherever I can the help that I need to do things. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I just go where I can to get what I can to do these things. And I make sort of popular art in a way, pop art in a sense. I'm not a snob. I want everyone to see the work. So it makes sense to go through TV, radio, film, music, whatever. Mediums mean nothing to me, really. Crossing through mediums is just whatever's best for the work. And often film is the best thing to use, especially now, because it can be seen anywhere. Most of my films are online somewhere to be seen. I don't keep things back. So for me, I just use whatever's at hand to do things.
It's funny. I was wondering though, but based on Ben's question, I was thinking like you do work in a certain kind of ethnographic tradition without any kind of ethnographic training.
Exactly, that's the problem. Which you could see as an ethical problem potentially, doing all this kind of stuff. You're not trained to do this, and it's kind of tricky material sometimes. Yeah. So you have to be aware of that. So yes, I basically am just scavenging around and trying to find what I can. to work in a way I can. And I'm a child of TV, grew up with television, I grew up watching the news, grew up watching TV, music shows and documentaries. And that's a world I'm very safe and happy in. As I'm happy in the world of museums, I grew up going to museums a lot. So I like working with museums. I mean, I haven't talked about any of that today. We're really doing talking about like these big.
I was thinking too, Jeremy, you know, your Depeche Mode movie, I'd love to talk about that just slightly. Because I was thinking too, like, your actual styles with filmmaking have a similar kind of visual language, a kind of ethnographic, looking at curious things. But who approaches you is always very different. And like, and then how whether they get what they want is also a different question.
Well, often they don't. If you work in the music industry, they don't really know what they want until they've told you they don't like what you've done. Basically, that's often the case. Yeah, I did. You know, sometimes I'm commissioned, sometimes I'm approached. Most of the time, I get approached, mainly because of the situation I find myself in. You know, because of I'm lucky to be in a position where I am approached. I don't have to chase work, so that's good. But you know, Nato's referring to a film I made, which I'm very, very fond of.
I love it so much.
About Depeche Mode fans around the world. Made in 2006. It's never really been properly seen. I mean, it gets screenings and whatnot, and it's online. But that's sort of the line. That's a police that's on my house. But you can't really see it that easily because the record company liked it, but the band didn't like it for a number of reasons. But it's really a journey around the world, looking at the effect the band has on people and how people interpret the band around the world. And there's some amazing moments in it, amazing archive of Russia in the early 90s with Russian fans and so on. It's an incredible story, really. But for a number of reasons, it was never shown. But it's a very entertaining film, basically. Very entertaining film about people's love of music, which is something I can identify with.
Let me go to Dan here. Go ahead, Dan.
I have to do this.
Oh,
okay.
You're on.
Jeremy, so an observation and a question. I'll get to the question, but I'm in Nato's class and I was watching Battle of Orgreave, and I got very emotional about it. I think because I recently realized that I have great grandparents who were one was potentially a minor in Wales and one was a minor in Belgium. And so it was kind of incredible to watch through this very personal lens. But one thing I also realized when I was watching all the footage of riot cops and all this stuff is, I grew up listening to Depeche Mode and Cabaret Voltaire and all this electronic music from the UK. And I had this revelation of oh God, that's why 80% of Cabaret Voltaire videos from the early 80s have riot cops in them and, abandoned buildings. And it sort of made sense. And just to kind of echo something that Nato said during your talk, which is in America, we have cultural divides, not so much ideological divides. Yeah. And it made me, it really sank in how much British culture is political. As much as American culture is politicized, it's sort of not the same. It's a sort of ancillary thing. It doesn't necessarily blend in the same way. So sorry, it's a long-winded way of getting to a question, which is how much are you interested in or think about or intend to make work that sort of foregrounds these two cultures, which are so similar in a way, the UK and the US, but are so sort of approach culture and politics in such a distinct way. I mean, it's almost like two petri dishes with the same strain that's gone.
My God, I love that question. It almost reminds me of, just as a note on that, Jeremy, when we were doing the one across America, I thought of you as a kind of Alexis de Tocqueville from the British vantage point. But have you done a project that compares Britain and the US? You've certainly worked in both places.
I haven't done one that directly compares. Just to go back to your question about Cabaret Voltaire, the reenactment and that event happened 3 miles from Sheffield. That's where Cabaret Voltaire are from. And it's possible that members of the band would have been present during that original battle in '84, because I know a lot of musicians did join picket lines and were present. and there were about 10,000 people there at least that day. So it's very possible. I know people in other bands were there. One of the members of Pulp was there, which again is a local band to Sheffield. So that is why, basically, but it's well observed. The thing about US and UK, I think, for me, the overriding difference, apart from guns, is religion. The way religion plays such a major part in US life and impinges and interferes with politics in a way that has no effect on Britain politics. We have churches, we have people go to churches, religious leaders, if anything, are left-wing and will gently admonish the government for starving people and just being, and taking away money that they might need to survive and stuff. But there's no religious political interference or crossover from what I can see. Thank God.
And certainly slavery.
Well, ours is a different history with slavery. And of course, we dealt with slaves. We had our colonists. It was outsourced in a sense to colonists. So we never had, in the way that America did, thousands and tens of thousands of people working on British soil in the UK as slaves. They were in the Caribbean. So it wasn't seen in the way, it wasn't part of daily life, but it would probably been known about. Maybe.
Trevor Noah said something funny. He said something like, colonialism makes no sense to me. He goes, at least in America it makes sense. You're brutal, you're oppressive, that makes sense. But in Britain, you were like, we want you to be like us, but we will take over your country. Like colonialism is a different project than slavery.
It's a different project. And also we've handled it, the British Empire, when I was going to school, but virtually didn't learn about it. And if you did, it was not seen as a bad thing. It was just something that happened. That's what we do. So history should be taught, and probably is being taught differently. But it's come to a point now where you go into these great stately homes, and now finally the people that own them, or the organizations that own them, are accounting for how the money came to make these incredible houses. It's insane wealth that is happening all around Britain. And if it wasn't from coal mines and exploitation of labor locally, it would have been through the empire and through colonialism and through trade. So we are beginning to better confront our history, but it's very different from your racial situation, I would argue, where black people in some places seem to still be treated not much better than they would have been 100 years ago as sort of post-slavery families and people.
I got to tell you, I think Dan's onto something, though, with this project that does two things at the same time with you. You've certainly, you've managed to work across the pond, and you do know these cultures. Certainly you know British culture better than the US, but you certainly have a fondness for both. And you've trained your camera on both places.
Yes, I have. When it occurs to me, when I have the idea, maybe I will. I just, at the moment, I'm quite preoccupied with a bunch of other things, work-wise. And this, it's kind of difficult to get to America at the moment, isn't it? It's not going to be that easy to get to America for the next 3
Well, you're here right now.
Months,
where are we right now? Where are we?
In what respect?
In the internet.
What do you mean?
Where are we in the internet, me and you, and all these students?
Well, quite. I mean, I can't come to America, much I'd like to, but I don't really know what I would do. But it's a nice idea to do something. But we're becoming more like you because of Brexit. We became more like you. But yesterday, the Prime Minister basically sacked his advisor, who was probably the most Steve Bannon person in Britain, more or less, felt like a technocrat, but with Steve Bannon confrontational ideas, who's at the heart of government, and he's out because he's made everyone so angry and done such a bad job with COVID and trying to react to it. So we'll see.
We have time for one last question from our esteemed working artist community. If anybody has one, I would love to see one more, but people have been so great, and I love what we've gotten so far. Anybody? Filmmakers? Socially engaged artists? weavers, techie people. Well, it's all right if it doesn't go. Hey, listen. So what we have, it's all fine. So listen, Jeremy, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate your time. We are going to, for the students too, everybody say thanks to Jeremy. Such a kind, incredible artist. My favorite artist on the planet. So great to have you with us. People love your work. And for those that don't know, we are going to do we have our lunch after this, Jeremy, where we all chat and eat. Or dinner or breakfast, because everyone's in different time zones around the planet, which is kind of fun and complicated. Sure. And I'll be answering questions about our next quarter and what we've got on tap. But everybody, thank you so much, Jeremy. Keep doing the great work.
See you from London.
See you. Bye-bye, bud.
Bye-bye. See you, Nathan.
Cheer, bud. Bye-bye.